Hi everybody, welcome back to Journeys with Jack. Today I have a rather exotic location to discuss, Ethiopia. So, in the fall of 2024, I had the opportunity to go over to Ethiopia to serve as a medical missionary. I've had great pleasure doing this a few times to different countries, and so lo and behold, it worked out that my friend Scott Jackson from Go Design lined it up, and I worked in a clinic in the Afar state. I want to show you right now my medical license, so hopefully you can see this. Yeah, so Afar Regional State Medical License, pretty cool. Anyhow, I flew in from London, from Gatwick, and came in on Ethiopian Airlines. So Ethiopian Airlines is the busiest African airline. Addis Ababa is really kind of a crossroads for the world. All kinds of people were continuing on into Asia and to Middle East, up to the various stands, Kyrgyzstan, Pakistan, etc., and then on into Equatorial Africa. My seatmates were a Nigerian minister and an English subject who was going to visit family in Zimbabwe. As a tribute to how busy Ethiopian Airlines is and how much traffic Bole Airport in Addis Ababa received, at one time Boeing, and maybe they still do, don't know, but I'd heard that Boeing had a specific maintenance shop there in Ethiopia to service the planes utilized. Well, so once I collected my luggage, interesting aspect, you pass through a metal detector on the way out of the airport for security. And then I took the shuttle provided by our hotel, the Ramada Inn, and I had to pass through another metal detector with my luggage to go into the hotel. Tremendous security. Now this Ramada Inn was fabulous, very modern, very spacious, excellent workout facilities, multiple restaurants, at least 3 that I patronized while passing through day in, day out on the front and back end of the trip. My friend Scott met me in the lobby, and I had some lamb tibs and some injera bread and St. George lager. So the injera bread is very spongy and can roll out, or you roll it up into a loop, or you unroll it and use it to push up the meat that you're eating, and can use that to sop up all the good, what we in the South would call gravy. I suppose they call it some sort of sauce there. Tibs are, as they sound, a sort of little tip or end of some of the meat, lamb, beef, etc. Quite delicious. So we went to bed, got up the next morning, were met by Talu and Kalkadin, who were 2 people that are also missionaries but local to Ethiopia and work with the Go Design non-government organization, which involves itself with building schools, orphanages, etc., to assist the local indigenous population. So we climbed into a diesel Toyota Land Cruiser truck, such as you get overseas but not available on the American market at present, and away we went, driving downhill from Addis Ababa. We passed through the Rift Valley and saw the homeland of the Oromo people. They had numerous local villages that we saw with circular thatched huts with a thatched roof. We went further along, and going downhill, the road progressively became flatter. I was amazed that we passed these enormous lumbering trucks, clearly overladen, coming from the port of Djibouti, whereby lots of the goods that are shipped into Ethiopia originate. Now, because these trucks are so overloaded, you'll notice many places on the tarmac where it is rutted. I mean, you're on paved asphalt, and then there's a deep rut in it on either side where these big trucks have been going through. It's really rather amazing to see. I'd never seen ruts in asphalt previously in my life. So as we progressed forward, the land flattened out further, and we came into a town called Awash, which had previously been known as Nazareth, the name having been changed. We'd passed by some beautifully ornate Orthodox Christian churches along the way, and as we came into Awash, we stopped to eat lunch. Had a great lunch called Shiro Wat, which is a chickpea paste rolled sort of rolled out like you might roll out cookie dough onto injera bread, and then seasoned with bearberry. Bearberry is a reddish seasoning in Ethiopia. Looks a wee bit like paprika, tastes more like maybe a mild pepper. It was quite good, and had that. Some had coffee, some had soft drinks. I need to take a moment and comment on coffee and comment on Ethiopia in general. So let me pause on the journey and talk about it. Ethiopia, very ancient country. It's mentioned twice in the Bible, in the Old Testament and New Testament. The New Testament, there was a servant of Queen Candace who was evangelized by Philip the evangelist and baptized in the book of Acts. In the Old Testament, perhaps better known account, the Queen of Sheba came up to visit King Solomon as she had heard about his wisdom. And so it is thought that there was a union between the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon that led to the dynasty that produced Menelik I, very famous emperor, subsequently Menelik II, and the last of that dynasty, Emperor Haile Selassie. So a little bit more on that later, but it was also thought that through this union with King Solomon and the subsequent dynasty, that the Ark of the Covenant was removed to Ethiopia. Now, I did not happen to see it during my visit, but there are many stories about it, and I think it's a rather interesting aspect of Ethiopian culture. Now, Ethiopia is home to three religions, Judaism and Christianity, and then subsequent to its development in the 7th century, Islam, and so Muslims as well. The state of Afar is about 99.9% Muslim, and that is where I went to practice medicine. Most of the Jews, it seems, have left Ethiopia. The Jews were known as Falashas in Ethiopia, and I met many of them when I traveled to Israel around 2012, but I suppose that'll be another story for another time. Now, another interesting historical aspect of Ethiopia is that that is the land that brought us coffee. Now, coffee in Ethiopia is called Buna, B-O-O-N-A, and when coffee is made in Ethiopia, or Buna is served, it's quite an experience. I want you to look at some of the pictures on Instagram and Facebook. It commonly is boiled over an open fire, and it is served to you with incense concurrently. So it's really an undertaking to participate in a drink of Buna with your host. So how was it discovered, you might ask? Well, apparently there was a herder, and he noted that some of the goats were rather frisky and energetic after eating a particular type of bean from a particular bush. So curiosity got the better of the gentleman, and he boiled it up and turned it into coffee, boiled the beans, then dried them out, I guess, boiled them, and out came coffee, and the rest is history, as they say. Anyway, so proceeding with the journey. Now, this was a 12-hour trek to get out to the village of Kamami, and when we got into the Afar region, everything flattened out, and soon the road ran out, and so we were driving on little more than a dirt track, and we had to ford about 5 rivers. I was quite thankful for the 4-wheel drive, hardy, rugged Toyota Land Cruiser. So as we were progressing, we noticed lots of people herding cattle, donkeys, camels, sheep, goats, and frequently they would be carrying AK-47s. I came to decide that the AK-47 seemed to be sort of a status symbol in the area, and later on, when I was conducting the medical clinic, sure enough, a gentleman came by to show off to Scott his new AK-47. Check out the pictures on Instagram and Facebook, please. So as we went through the Afar region, the dwelling places were quite different than those of the Oromo people. The dwelling places in Afar seem to be more of curved sticks, and there's lots of trees in this arid region, flat-top trees, as one might see with pictures from Africa. I noticed that they were very similar to the descriptions that exist in the book True at First Light by Ernest Hemingway. I'd recommend that as good reading for anyone that wants to get a straightforward, up-close commentary on Africa from an American who spent quite a bit of time there. So anyway, the Afar people construct with branches from these trees kind of rounded dwellings that are covered with a tarpaulin. Now they're very, very small and elongated, kind of like if you took a Easter egg. If you ever had kids hunting the little plastic Easter eggs, and if you took one of the ones that broke apart, not in the middle, but elongated, and laid it on the ground. So it's covered with a tarpaulin. I couldn't stand up inside. I'd be too tall, and most others don't either. It's really for sleeping and dwelling overnight. As I mentioned, most of the time during the day, people are out doing the herding, etc. We also notice a lot of people chewing khat. And khat, spelled K-H-A-T, is a plant that grows in that part of the world that has a mild hallucinatory high associated with it. So it's kind of like it's not really to the same degree of potency as methamphetamine, but it's a type of amphetamine or speed, if you will, commonly used in that part of the world. Unfortunately, I later saw some of the ravages of recurrent use of khat when I conducted the clinic, but I'll get to that in a moment. So we finally arrived in Kamami about dark and went to the Go Design compound where they had a brick building, but unfortunately no electricity except when you fired up the generator, and they had piped water to the area but did not have adequate running water. In fact, something had happened to the pipe where it no longer worked. So fortunately we brought a lot of bottled water, and so we wound up having dinner, which was peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and had some buna cooked over open flame, and all went to bed. We turned on the generator so we could have a fan as it was a little bit warm, and I slept underneath mosquito nets. So the next morning, I got up and went down to the local medical center where there was no electricity and conducted a clinic. I would like you to examine the pictures. There were lots and lots of people who came from all around. They'd hung up signs in advance advising people that I would be there certain days. And so there's a strong word of mouth telegraph, if you will, throughout the various communities, and many, many people came, and they were quite in need. There was lots of infectious disease, as you might expect with a predominantly herding lifestyle, and then there was a lot of osteoarthritis. Unfortunately, there were also some ravages of recurrent use of the drug khat, lots of dental disease, dental caries, etc. I worked really from early in the morning until late in the evening, but we took a break at lunchtime and had a little siesta, so to speak. Went back, and I wound up finishing up at the main clinic as dark unfolded. Some of the work that I needed to have very good light during the day, I had to go outside to utilize the sunlight. So as dark descended, I made some house calls in the village, and then back to the Go Design building where we had some fresh goat. It was delicious, boiled up over an open fire, which is how most of the cooking is undertaken there. In fact, all the cooking that I saw was over open fire. So the next morning we got up to head back to Addis Ababa, and after the busy clinic. So we decided to break the trip into two parts because it was just a rough go on the 12-hour trip. So we went about 6 hours to the Doho Resort. Now, when I say resort, I want you to recognize that this was a outdoor camping, maybe like glamping, I suppose. But so Doho is an area where there are some local hot springs of salt water, even though it's quite inland. Now, gathering salt is a big activity in the Afar region, and we saw people cutting up blocks of salt, there's certain areas where there's salt deposits and salt water that comes up from these hot springs. And so they'd built a resort of some huts somewhat similar to what the Oromo people would build, and we stayed in some there, and it was a good way to break up the trip. And we saw an ostrich there. That was rather interesting, and it was very relaxing getting in what was basically a hot tub, saltwater hot tub, and beautiful sunset. So please check the pictures. Well, the next day we got up, had great breakfast, great Buna again, and headed off to Addis Ababa. Reached that city about 1 p.m. And I wanted to get some souvenirs for the family because, after all, you're not in Ethiopia every day. So over by the main post office is the place to go for souvenir shopping. There's a 2 to 3 story building, can't recall exactly, but it had everything you could think of, all kinds of antiques. It had some old war medals from the Second Italo Ethiopian War, which was World War II era, about 1940. The British General Ord Wingate teamed up with Haile Selassie to defeat the Italians and lead the Ethiopians triumphantly back into Addis Ababa. There's a massive monument celebrating the work of Ord Wingate assisting Haile Selassie. I'd like to point out that Ord Wingate, that guy got around. He also was in Israel and helped out there with the battle, and there's a big monument for him in Israel. And he was later over in Burma with the World War II campaign against the Japanese there. So also many artifacts from the time of Haile Selassie, and I picked up this interesting dollar bill from the year of my birth, 1966. That's your cue to say, well, you don't look that old, so thank you very much. But anyway, so here it is down below at the bottom. At the top, you'll probably recognize Queen Elizabeth. She and Haile Selassie were monarchs that reigned concurrently. I find them to be really, to me, the two most fascinating 20th century monarchs. Haile Selassie was deposed in a communist overthrow about 1974. Off and on, he reigned from 1930 to 1974, interrupted, of course, by the Italian invasion during the Second World War. Now, there was another war, the first Italo-Ethiopian War culminated in 1896 with the defeat of the Italians at the Battle of Adwa, and they were led by Menelik II. You remember me speaking earlier about the dynasty from Solomon and Queen of Sheba that led down through Menelik I and Menelik II. So Menelik II, there's a giant equestrian statue for him on the streets of Addis Ababa as well. Other things they have were various and sundry different flags, patches, the traditional type of pitcher in which Buna is made, etc. And then I went over to the post office and sent some postcards to the wife and children, etc. Now, I want to speak about something that if I didn't mention it, I would be remiss. So, Ethiopia, Haile Selassie, descended from Queen of Sheba and Solomon, or so it is reported. His pre-coronation name was Ras Tafari. That might seem familiar. So the Rastafarian movement, espoused most significantly, I think, by Bob Marley, the Jamaican musician, felt that the Emperor Haile Selassie embodied the second coming of Jesus Christ. So I want to show you this t-shirt, and this shows, it's hard to read, but I'll get it up close. So this is a Bob Marley t-shirt that I got in London a few years ago, and it shows the old Ethiopian flag at the top with a symbol of Haile Selassie, who called himself the Lion of the Conquering Tribe of Judah, and then below it mentions Selassie above the picture for Bob Marley. So this movement came about based on Haile Selassie, and there were some Jamaican Rastafarians who actually immigrated to Ethiopia, set up a colony there, and still live there to this day. Now, let me show you about the flags that I mentioned a minute ago, because I think it's interesting. This is the old Ethiopian flag featuring the symbol of Haile Selassie. And then, after he was overthrown by the communists in the 1970s, there's a museum about that, which refers to it as the Red Terror. And then later, the communists were ousted, and we now have a more democratic system in Ethiopia. But this is what the new Ethiopian flag looks like. And I was most fortunate when I was at the post office. I had encountered a guard there, one of the soldiers. There's civil patrol all over the place. And I'd shown him the old Ethiopian flag, and he'd shown me the new one on his uniform. As I came out of the post office after getting the stamps, he gave me the new flag. Pretty cool. All right, well, I hope that you'll go to Ethiopia. Fascinating place and full of history, full of adventure. Thanks very much for tuning in. Have a great day.